What unsolved mystery was solved? Deep Throat, an anonymous source who gave a great deal of important information on the Watergate scandal to Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein in 1972. In 2005 his identity was finally revealed. Mark Felt, then the number 2 man in the FBI and mad at President Nixon for not promoting him to be that agency's head. The burial place of British monarch Richard III. Killed in the 1485 Battle of Bosworth Field. The location of his hastily buried remains stayed unknown until 2012 when they were found under a British parking lot. Stardust, a British South America Airlines passenger plane that disappeared in 1947 on a flight from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Santiago, Chile after sending the famous last message, Stendek. Its fate remained unknown until 1998 when mountain climbers found its wreckage high in the Andes. The most likely explanation for the crash was navigational error.
The story touches on some key historical events. Deep Throat's identity revealing years later adds an interesting twist to the Watergate scandal. Richard III's remains surfacing under a parking lot shows how history can surprise us. The mystery of Stardust and its last message, Stendek, creates intrigue, especially since it took decades to find its wreckage. Navigational error seems like a simple reason for such a complex event.
Ben Needham, a poor toddler from Sheffield, UK, my childhood home, vanished when visiting his grandparents' house in Kos, Greece. He was running in and out of the patio doors to the garden, playing with his toys, and then suddenly he just wasn't there anymore. It was all over the news where I lived for many years. I felt so sorry for his poor mother and the rest of the family. There were arguments about Greek police not doing enough, British police not helping enough or doing too much, awful unfounded rumors about family and people nearby, DNA test on kids suspected of maybe being Ben, discussed that the Madeleine McCann story got all the press and money. Eventually one of the workers on a nearby construction site dies of cancer and his secret confession is revealed. He accidentally ran the boy over with his digger and covered it up instead of coming clean. I know they found the toys he was playing with at the time buried nearby recently, but not sure if they have found his remains yet. Such a shame and waste of so many years on an international investigation with so much pain. Edit, spelling.
This is a really tragic story. It's tough to think about a family going through such a painful experience. It's disturbing to hear about the potential confession and the lost years of searching. Families affected by these cases deserve closure, and it's hard not knowing what truly happened.
How a wooden boat and large copper drum got to be on Bouvet Island, the most remote island in the world. A Norwegian scientific expedition found the boat and copper drum on the island in 1978, but given how remote the island is no one was sure how they got there. A few years ago a history blogger made a post about it and the internet detective machine figured it out. The boat was left by a Soviet expedition who used it as shelter after they became trapped by bad weather and were airlifted out. The copper drum was left by a ham radio operator who visited the island.
It's interesting how a remote place like Bouvet Island ended up with a wooden boat and copper drum. The backstory makes sense, especially with the Soviet expedition getting caught in bad weather. The mystery around it definitely adds some intrigue. It's funny how a history blogger and some internet sleuths pieced it all together. Just shows the power of online research.
The disappearance of Chandra Levy. Levy was a young intern with the Federal Bureau of Prisons whose affair with Congressman Gary Condit overshadowed the media attention before eventually being ignored due to the attacks on the Twin Towers on September 11. They found her body a year later and determined she had been murdered. Gary Condit was innocent. He had meetings the night she went AWOL but eventually had to resign. In 2009, an undocumented immigrant from El Salvador was charged with her murder. However, the case was appealed and he is facing deportation. Edit, I am suggesting the unsolved mystery is she went missing, and that the answer was Levy was murdered. I realize that looking back at my post, it makes it seem like I am saying that Levy's murder was solved. Since the case was appealed, technically her murder is considered to be unsolved.
It's a complicated case. Chandra Levy's disappearance got a lot of attention, mainly because of the congressman involved. The timeline got overshadowed by September 11th, which changed everything. Even though someone was charged later, the fact that the case is still seen as unsolved adds to the mystery. It's unfortunate that there are still so many questions surrounding her death.
Roanoke Colony. Though I guess kind of a mystery, just not really. First, it's pretty clear they went to live with the Croton. Like John White's instructions when he left was, if you have to move in with the Croton, write the word croton on this big tree. Guess what he found when he returned in 1590 after being gone for 5 years? He was forced back by storms on this trip, so couldn't even check the croton. The issue is he couldn't get another expedition together to go check. And there was little incentive. The legal structure of Sir Walter Raleigh's monopoly on settlements at the time required there to be a colony in order to maintain it, so until the next colony was founded, everyone just pretended the legal fiction that Roanoke was still kicking. So no one really investigated Roanoke again until Jamestown in 1607-ish. Like, that's basically 20 years. So yeah, it's kind of a mystery, but it's pretty clear the colonists went to live with the Indians, either eventually dying in a war or going further away. 20 years is a long time.
It's interesting how the Roanoke colony is labeled a mystery, but the signs point to them merging with the croton. The legal issues around the settlement didn't help either. It's telling that it wasn't until Jamestown that anyone really cared to look into it again.
Grateful Doe/Jason Callahan. I remember following that case online for years and being really haunted with the details, the creepy facial reconstruction pictures, the description of his face being mangled beyond recognition in the accident, the note in his pocket. I always hoped they would find his identity to give his family peace. I remember being so relieved when they finally discovered that the body was Jason Callahan, but always found it sad/unsettling that his mother waited so long to file a missing person report just because she wasn't sure what region to file it under. It took 20 years, but at least it's finally solved. Edit, typo.
It's tough to think about how long it took to identify him, and the uncertainty his mother endured. It's good that it was finally resolved, though it raises questions about communication in missing person cases.
This isn't what I would call the best, but still entertaining. The famous Paulding Light in Upper Michigan was fabled to have been the ghost of a railroad worker who died from a train accident, a Native American ghost, among others. It served as an effective tourist trap for the area, bringing in visitors from all over and even being featured on some of this cheesy Discovery Channel style shows. People have come to watch the lights do all sorts of things, get bigger, become red, bounce around in the distance. Eventually, Michigan Tech researchers put in some effort to research it and discovered it was simply a result of car lights from the highway. It took them less than an hour, apparently. Anticlimactic, but nice to see superstition snubbed by science.
The Paulding Light story is interesting, but it feels pretty typical. People love ghost stories, especially when there's a belief in something supernatural. It's amusing how folks get drawn into these attractions, only to find out it's just car lights. A classic case of science cutting through the hype. Makes you wonder how many other legends are just, well, nothing special. Overall, not too surprising.
When I was in high school, a well-known senior disappeared one day. He was a soccer dude who was very popular around the school. I knew him cause I did soccer too, but we didn't really know each other. Just through practice and games. I was JV and he was the star. This happened a few weeks before his high school graduation. Basically, this is the timeline people drew up. He took the bus home that day at 2:10. At 3 he was seen at the library by his house. From 3 till 6 he was at the library. Then he left the library and either got kidnapped or ran away, but a few weeks later his body was found in a river in a nearby city. Police called it a suicide. He was failing classes and wasn't on track to graduate. His friends noticed that he seemed very different the days before, and he never goes to the library of all places, but to this day I still think he didn't commit suicide. He just couldn't. I know it.
A popular guy like that disappearing before graduation raises a lot of questions. The timeline seems a bit off, especially with him being at the library for so long. It's understandable to doubt the suicide ruling given the circumstances. A lot of people might feel the same way. It's a tough situation.
I saw some of the artifacts from the Terror at the Canadian Museum of Nature a few months after the ship was located. It was pretty cool. My favorite story about the Franklin expedition is when 3 of the men stumbled into an Inuit winter village. They were starving, sick with scurvy, and hypothermic. The Inuit thought the men were some sort of walking ghost because their breath wasn't visible in the cold and they were mottled blue and gray. The Inuit put them in an igloo, left the men with a whole seal worth of meat, and promptly abandoned their village. The men were evil spirits or sick. 3 days later the Inuit came back to check on them, only to find them dead of starvation beside the uneaten raw seal. Had they not been too disgusted to eat the meat, they would have lived and their scurvy would have been also fixed.
That's an interesting story. Find it fascinating how survival instincts play out differently across cultures. Makes you think about the challenges faced during those expeditions and the dire situations people found themselves in. It's a harsh reminder of the choices we make.
During the 1970s, several U.S. Navy submarines were forced back to base to repair damage caused by cookie-cutter shark bites to the neoprene boots of their N/BQR-19 sonar domes, which caused the sound-transmitting oil inside to leak and impaired navigation. An unknown enemy weapon was initially feared, before this shark was identified as the culprit, and the problem was solved by installing fiberglass covers around the domes. In the 1980s, some 30 U.S. Navy submarines were damaged by cookie-cutter shark bites, mostly to the rubber-sheath electric cable leading to the sounding probe used to ensure safety when surfacing in shipping zones. Again, the solution was to apply a fiberglass coating. Oceanographic equipment and telecommunications cables have also been damaged by this species. Wikipedia. They were biting the rubber on different kinds of equipment, not the steel hull.
That's an interesting story about cookie-cutter sharks. The fact that they were biting rubber instead of steel shows they can be a real nuisance. The solutions employed, like fiberglass coatings, seem practical. It's a reminder that even in advanced technology, nature can find a way to impact operations.
The Elisa Lam Furor was so inane. One of the biggest mysteries we kept hearing was about how it's super unlikely a girl working alone could have opened the access hatch on that water tank, and there was absolutely no way how one person could have closed it after themselves. Then finally somebody with a camera gets access to a different hotel roof and shows the extremely standard hatch, which is pretty much just a heavy slab on a hinge that lets it open 180 degrees, to lie down and keep inspectors and cleaners safe from some support failing. So yes, if she'd opened it the entire way, she couldn't have closed it. But obviously she just lifted it partially and slid under it, letting its drop closed behind her. Add to that the fact that she was supposed to be on a laundry list of medications and hadn't taken any of them.
It seems like the situation around Elisa Lam became a wild speculation fest. The idea that she couldn't have opened that hatch is pretty unfounded, especially after seeing how it works. It's just a simple design. Plus, her medical condition plays a big role in the whole scenario. It's strange how people jump to conclusions without looking at the practical details. Makes you think about how we approach these so-called mysteries.
I love the way this happened. They were filmed doing a dig in the car park, with the intention of seeing if the abbey walls were where they thought they should be. Just basic research, to confirm the assumed location of the building that might have been where the king was buried. In the first trench, rather than the wall they were looking for, they found a body. Digging further, they saw the bent spine. At this point the archaeologists started to hyperventilate, hardly daring to believe that they had actually found the body with their very first dig. As she said, archaeology just doesn't work like that.
It's interesting how unexpected discoveries can happen in archaeology. That must have been a shock for the archaeologist, especially on the first dig. It's a reminder that the past can surprise you in ways you don't expect. Makes you wonder what else is buried beneath the surface.
The final resolution of the case was triggered by a chance discovery. In early 1986, English tourist David Brett fell to his death from Uluru during an evening climb. Because of the vast size of the rock and the scrubby nature of the surrounding terrain, it was 8 days before Brett's remains were discovered, lying below the bluff where he had lost his footing and in an area full of dingo lairs. As police searched the area, looking for missing bones that might have been carried off by dingoes, they discovered a small item of clothing. It was quickly identified as the crucial missing piece of evidence from the Chamberlain case, Azaria's missing matinee jacket.
This sounds like a significant turn in an ongoing investigation. The connection between the tourist's accident and the earlier case with Azaria's jacket is really interesting. It's odd how one event can lead to the resolution of another seemingly unrelated incident. This discovery must have brought a lot of attention to both cases again. The timing and circumstances are quite remarkable, linking different parts of history together.
Related, the transits of Mercury. Mercury wasn't quite moving as people thought, based upon Newton's laws of gravity. Turned out that the solution was that Mercury was close enough to the Sun for general relativity to be necessary to predict its movements more accurately than about 100 parts per trillion. General relativity wasn't known at the time. Side note, this is true for GPS satellites as well. General relativity predicts that they experience time at a slightly different rate, about 7 microseconds per day, to an Earth-bound observer, because of the relativistic effects of Earth's gravity well. Whilst small, these add up.
Mercury's orbit not aligning with Newton's laws led to the need for general relativity. It's wild to think that this theory also affects things like GPS satellites, making time different for them compared to us on Earth. Those small differences really do add up over time. Just shows how complex our universe is, even in ways we don't always notice.
Read a few different accounts a couple years ago. It was test equipment involving a weather balloon and crash test dummies. The actual nature of the experiment has yet to be declassified, but all the witness accounts involve, this person said that, and none of the names corroborated to people actually involved. Even more intriguing, the fact that the military kept mum about the nature of their operations despite enlisting civilian help to look for the broken pieces of the aircraft was utilized to keep a shroud over their actual experiments, most of which have been declassified by now.
It's interesting how witness accounts can vary so much, and it seems like there's a lot of secrecy around military operations. It's a bit odd that they keep so much under wraps, especially if some details are declassified. Makes you wonder what else is out there that's still hidden.
This pattern cracks me up. White scientist, look what I just stumbled upon in the jungle. It's an entirely new species that no one has ever seen before. Local indigenous tribe, we've been telling you that thing was in there for the last 200 years. We use it to make soup. White scientist, yes, but that didn't count because I thought you were superstitious savages making stuff up. I am the discoverer of a species never before known to mankind. I shall go down in history. Local indigenous tribe, shrugging whatever. Okay, guys, I'm hungry, let's go get a jackalope sandwich.
This is pretty funny. The scientist thinks he's making a grand discovery, but the locals are just over it. It's a classic case of someone thinking they're the hero of the story when they're not really. Pretty relatable.
Anastasia was a member of the royal family ruling Russia prior to the Russian Revolution. When the Romanov family was murdered, her body was unaccounted for, while the authorities claimed she was killed as well. There was no concrete proof. This blew up into a sensationalist story all over the world with people speculating that she survived and was living incognito. Sightings and even people claiming to be Anastasia continued for decades, lasting pretty much until her natural lifespan was estimated to be over. It's similar to the theories that Hitler survived WW2 since his remains were difficult to verify and the Russians lied about executing him. The skull they offered as proof turned out to be a woman's. This also led to less popular theories that Hitler was actually a woman.
The uncertainty around her fate really captured people's imaginations. It's similar to the conspiracies about Hitler and his remains. Both cases show how speculation can thrive in the absence of solid evidence, leading to some wild theories. It just goes to show how history can be twisted over time.